Hello guys. Welcome back to my channel. What if Naruto befriended Tayuya and trained to defy Orochimaru's fate? Part 1. Naruto and Tayuya stood in front of the Hokage's desk. Or rather, Naruto stood and Tayuya sat in a wheelchair next to him. He played with the zipper on his orange jumpsuit, struggling to zip it up to his chin. He only had 2 more at home, and they all felt a bit tight since his fight with his former teammate. Tayuya wore simple black ninja pants and a dark blue long-sleeved shirt. The bandages on her head and left arm were still present, but she'd been able to get out of her leg casts in favor of a couple of small metal braces. The Hokage finished signing off on one last sheet of paper before leaning back in her chair. Finally, that's the last of them. She reached into her drawer and tossed a leaf Hitai aid to Tayuya, who deftly caught it with her left hand. Congratulations, you're an official genin of Konoha. By wearing this headband, you acknowledge that you will protect this village and the people in it with your life, blah, blah, blah. Do you accept? Tayuya cocked an eyebrow at the blonde. Do I have a choice? She asked, fingering the thick cloth of the headband. Tsunade nodded. Actually, you do. You can either become a Konoha ninja or I can turn you over to Morino Ibiki for interrogation. She smirked inwardly. She was bluffing, but they didn't need to know that. Naruto's face visibly paled in recognition of the name. Though he hated to admit it, the scarred special Junin had quite an effect on him. Ah. Tayuya, I think you should just accept, he whispered. The girl eyed him strangely, noticing the slightly nervous look on his face. He's a really scary guy. Instead of arguing, she turned back to the Godem and nodded. Fine, but I ain't gonna like it. She lifted the headband towards her escort expectantly. He stared at the headband in confusion, an action which quickly annoyed his red-haired companion. Put it on me, dipshit. I only got one arm. Shut up. I'm not psychic, geez. He grabbed the headband and moved to put it on her forehead before pausing. Where do you want it? She titled her head in thought. Tie it around my neck. The blonde grunted and tied the cloth into a loose knot around her neck. Happy? No, TCH, not even a thank you. The fifth slammed her fist down onto the desk, effectively quieting the teens down. Listen up, she bellowed, causing Naruto to flinch. Both of you are to report to room 23 at the academy. I've arranged for one of the Chunin teachers there to assign you a few tasks to keep you busy. Tayuya frowned deeply in response. Yeah, one problem, Blondie. My legs don't work, Tsunade smirked. I've informed them of your condition, so whatever they set up won't require a whole lot of movement. If there's nothing else, get out of my sight. She drawled, waving them off. Grudgingly, Naruto grabbed the handles of his new teammate's wheelchair and began to push her towards the door. He accidentally pushed her legs into the door frame, earning himself a hard elbow in the side. Watch where you're going, dipshit. Yes, Tayuya Haim. Shut up and push. Lucky for her, neither of the genin turned around to see the mile-wide grin Tsunade had on her face. Part 1 of Operation Skin Orochimaru's scrawny ass, complete. They were everywhere. Laughing, taunting, torturing. Little horns protruded from their large melon-shaped heads, and large globs of blood clung to their faces as if they had just eaten 20 shinobi alive right before they had arrived. At least that's what Tayuya saw when nearly a dozen kindergartners swarmed her as soon as she had appeared through the door of room 23. Read us a story. Wanna play dress up? Hey, what's wrong with your legs? Can I sit in your lap? Is he your boyfriend? Tayuya sat mortified amongst the large group of 5-year-olds. When the Hokage mentioned they would be working at the academy, she assumed they would be filing papers or showing 10-year-olds how to throw a kunai. Never in a million years would she have expected something as inhumane as this. She glanced up at Naruto and was glad to see that he was equally shocked. At least she could be sure that he wasn't in on this. The Chunin who had shown them the room snickered slightly at their expressions before turning and making a mad dash down the hallway. Have fun. They really like stories, he yelled over his shoulder, turning a corner at record-breaking speed. That has to be some kind of escape jutsu, Naruto thought as he watched the shinobi flee from the classroom. A slight tug of his pants snapped him from his thoughts. Nay, Oni-chan. Are you our new sensei? The genin glanced down to see a sickly brown-haired boy staring up at him with large, hopeful eyes. Why yes. A large chorus of cheers went throughout the room. A few of the toddlers darted off to grab books, blankets, and pillows, much to the genin's confusion. It wasn't until the same little boy held up a large book to Tayuya that they understood. Her eyes widened and she began to shake her head ferociously. No. Not a chance in hell. She screamed, attempting to hop out of her chair and crawl towards the door. Unfortunately, a little girl had somehow made her way into the genin's lap, foiling her escape plan, Her escort snickered and waved an admonishing finger in front of her face. Watch your language, Tayuya-sensei. There are children in the room. She growled and practically snatched the book from the little boy, only further amusing the blonde, who was suspiciously 3 steps closer to the door. Tayuya narrowed her eyes and smirked. Where are you going, Naruto-sensei? I'm going to need someone to turn the pages for me. I only have one arm, after all. She asked in a sickeningly sweet voice, using his own sarcasm against him. Realizing he'd been caught, Naruto groaned and sat down in the empty chair closest to her. Grinning to herself at the small victory, she turned to read the title of the book in her hand. The Princess and the Fox. The girl glanced up to see that every set of eyes in the classroom was watching her intently. Though it was a little unnerving, she was happy to see that they were at least being quiet. When they were quiet, she didn't have the incredibly powerful urge to roast them over a large flaming pit of charcoal. Alive. Naruto reached over and turned the cover so that she could continue. Once upon a time, there was a princess who lived in a beautiful castle. Many of the animals loved her, but none of them loved her more than her friend the fox. She picked the book up to show the children the pictures before turning to the next page herself. Hey, you don't need me to turn the pages for you, Naruto yelped, shooting up from his chair. Tayuya grinned. Deception is one of the tricks to being a ninja, isn't it? Now sit down and let me continue. Looking back down at the book, she continued. One day, the princess decided to visit her friend the wizard. The girl glanced up to make sure that Naruto was still in the room. She noticed with some surprise that he wasn't in his seat anymore. He was sitting on the large blanket with the toddlers, a few of them leaning against him as they listened to the story. What happened next, Tayuya-sensei? The girl in her lap asked, snuggling back against her. What the genin asked herself, blinking in surprise at the foreign feeling. Deciding it wasn't completely uncomfortable, she continued on with the story. The forest was thick and dangerous, with giant weasels, frogs, and snakes at every turn. But the princess wasn't afraid. She knew her friend the fox was watching her. Tayuya snorted. Who writes this shit? After walking for a while, she came upon a giant white snake. Where are you going, little girl? The snake boomed, staring with big yellow eyes at the princess. A shudder went through her as she absent-mindedly fingered her cursed seal, an action which didn't go unnoticed by Naruto. But the princess wasn't afraid. She knew her friend the fox was watching her. The princess stood up straight and looked the snake in the eye. I'm going to visit my friend the wizard, Orochi-san, she said, unaware that she was being hypnotized by the snake's big yellow eyes. A gasp went through the crowd of toddlers, the loudest of all coming from her escort. She fought to keep a smirk from breaking out onto her face at their expressions. Even she had to admit that she was really starting to enjoy having all of the attention focused on herself for once. The big white snake smiled evilly and slithered his way over to the princess. Well, princess. The snake hissed, wrapping himself around her. Allow me to escort you there. With the princess wrapped in his slimy skin, the big white snake headed for his lair. Just as he was about to enter his home, a golden fox appeared and Tayuya trailed off, glancing up at the clock. That's the end of story time. The children all stared at her in disbelief. Nani? You can't just end it there. What happened to the princess? Did the giant snake eat her? Come on, Tayuya-sensei, finish the story. Tayuya grinned maliciously to herself. Though it wasn't quite as entertaining as watching the little demons roast, it would have to do. For now. Naruto stood up and grinned. She's right, guys. It's snack time. Their disappointment forgotten, the toddlers all hopped up and ran to their little plastic tables and chairs. After setting down a few cookies and a carton of milk in front of each of the children, the genin inched their way towards the door. Only to back into the same sickly little boy from before. His eyes were wide and his lips were puffed up into a small pout. You'll come back and finish the story, won't you, Tayuya-sensei? The girl blinked and forced a small smile onto her face. Sure. Jin. Seemingly satisfied, the boy bounced off towards the others. Not wanting to risk being stopped again, Naruto grabbed her wheelchair and practically raced down the hall and out of the academy, not stopping until he was well into the residential district of Konoha. After receiving another sharp jab in the ribs from Tayuya, he finally slowed his pace down to a walk. So, did you enjoy story time? Naruto asked, stepping back far enough to avoid another jab from the irate redhead. What the do you think, Blondie? Those little wits almost drove me mad. Looked like you were getting into it to me. I was not. Are you sure, princess? He asked, imitating a voice she'd done previously. The girl blushed and stared forward. Just shut up and push, dipshit. The blonde genin laughed and continued on down the street. They walked on in silence until she cleared her throat. Hey, Naruto. I wanted to apologize for the shit I said about your teacher yesterday. Naruto blinked in surprise. He'd only known her for a couple of days, but he didn't think the word, apologize, was even in her vocabulary. Oh. He scratched the back of his head sheepishly. Well, I have to say I'm sorry for what I said yesterday. It wasn't right. She nodded and shrugged. Fine, we're even then. Don't get all sentimental and shit on me. So where the hell are we going now? Well, you're going back to the hospital. I'm going to train so that I can bring Sasuke back. What? Oh, no, you're taking me with you. He stopped in surprise. Nani? For what? You'll just get in my way. There ain't no way in hell I'm gonna stay cooped up in that shithole of a hospital all day while you get to run around in the mother-son. By this time, a small crowd of civilians had gathered around the teens, whispering amongst themselves. And just what the are you cocksuckers looking at? The crowd quickly dispersed, though there was no shortage of glares or snide comments thrown her way. Geez, you guys are making a scene. A lazy voice said from behind them. Naruto turned in surprise. Shikamaru. How's Choji, Neji, Kiba, Lee? He asked, reprimanding himself for not asking about them earlier. Though, he couldn't be blamed when all of his thoughts were focused on his temporary teammate and Sasuke. They're all fine. Choji and Neji got the worst of it, though, he said, grimacing slightly. It wasn't your fault. You did the best you could. Shikamaru nodded and glanced at the girl currently glaring at him from her wheelchair. Oi, you lived, huh? I have to admit, I'm more than a little surprised. I didn't think anyone could survive a blast like that. Tayuya glowered dangerously at the Chunin. I ain't weak like you shitty leaf ninja, but aren't you one too? He asked, taking notice of her headband. How did you become a leaf ninja anyway? TCH, easy. You faggots are so weak that the Hokage herself had me instated to help you all out. Watch your back, bitch, 'cause I'm coming for your ass. She smirked up at him, practically daring him to reply. Even though you can't use your legs. Right, he continued on past Naruto and a fuming Tayuya. Later, Naruto, troublesome woman. Naruto snickered at her expression. He's right, you can't use your legs, back to the hospital. You. Naruto took a deep breath, focusing himself on the log in front of him. It slowly began to distort and shape into Orochimaru. The perfect target to take his anger out on. Lashing out with right hook, he rolled to his left and followed it up with a perfectly executed roundhouse. He then flipped over his target and gave it a strong donkey kick. The wood splintered slightly under the pressure, much to his delight. Punching the log a dozen times in succession, he performed a perfect backhand spring and landed 30 feet away, taking deep breaths of air. All of this happened in a span of around 5 seconds. You suck. A voice yelled from behind him. The blonde turned around and flipped the person off. Shut up. Can't you see I'm training? Oh, is that what you're doing? I thought you were doing the chicken dance or something. Naruto's eye twitched in anger. He was already regretting not leaving her at the hospital. Okay, Tayuya-sensei, why don't you give me a few pointers? He snapped his fingers in mock realization. Ooh, that's right. You can't because you're stuck in a wheelchair, Naruto yelled, feeling a bit of the Kyuubi's chakra trying to slip out of him. Tayuya blinked. Just when she thought he was incapable of getting truly upset, he pulls a stunt like this. Strangely enough, she didn't get the smug satisfaction she usually got from making others angry. In fact, she felt slightly hurt. What the hell am I thinking? I've been trying to do this all along. It must be something in the food. Those bitches are trying to turn me into one of them. Well, excuse me for trying to help your no-talent ass out. This time, Naruto blinked. She actually wanted to help. He felt the small amount of sinister chakra quickly drain from his system. You want to help me? Why? Tayuya again rubbed at the cursed seal on her neck, keeping her eyes low. I want to pay that bastard back for his gift. Since I can't him up myself, what better way than to have an indirect hand in training the who knocks him off? His eyes widened in disbelief. All this time, he thought she wanted to go back to the Sound and Orochimaru. Perhaps he wasn't the only surprising ninja in this village anymore. Did you accept it willingly? She snorted and narrowed her eyes. Yeah, but when I did, he only me 2 things. 1, that it would exponentially increase my chakra, and 2, that it only had a 1 in 10 survival rate. He didn't mention all of the bad things that came along with it. A sudden realization came to Naruto. If Tayuya had a cursed seal like Sasuke, she could help him study his weaknesses for when it was time to bring him back. Bad things? Like what? The girl looked thoughtful for a few minutes. Well, for one thing, Orochimaru can pretty much control us if he wants to, through our seals. The bastard can inflict an inhumane amount of pain on our entire nervous system. He can also stop us from using it altogether. She glanced up at him, only to find that he was practically raping her personal space. Gah! What the hell are you doing? He blinked and leaned back. What do you mean? I was just looking at your cursed seal. Jay, just go over there so I can help you train, she yelled, pointing at the field in front of them. Just as he was about to walk away, she grabbed his arm. Wait, he looked back at her curiously. What? Can you take me out of this chair? It's hard as, she asked, a light scowl marring her face. Shrugging, he quickly scooped her up in his arms and set her down under the shade of a large tree. How's that? Tayuya leaned her head back and stretched, enjoying the feel of the lush grass beneath her and the freedom to move as she wished. Well, as free as one could without mobility in their legs. Fantastic. He stared at her for a few more seconds before smirking. You know, you're not as ugly as usual when you're not scowling. She quickly brought her arms back down and crossed them over her chest. Yeah. Get into your usual stance and I'll tell you what you're doing wrong. He nodded and happily settled himself into a stance that one of the academy instructors taught him before he became a genin. Is that your stance? She asked after he stopped moving. Yeah? The girl smirked, then grinned, then chuckled, and before long, she was full on guffawing. Tears gathered at the corners of her eyes as she began to choke on her own spittle. What the hell is that? Whoever taught you that shit was trying to get you killed, she screamed in mirth. Naruto's eyes dimmed as his arms slowly lowered to his sides. Her laughter immediately quieted down as she noticed a drastic change in his usual somewhat cheerful expression. Goddamn, you act like I ripped your balls off or something. I was just kidding about the trying to get you killed part. I'm sure they just didn't know what they were doing. His eyes hardened in anger. No, I think they knew exactly what they were doing. Tayuya almost gasped. Almost. She couldn't believe that a teacher would purposely sabotage one of their students, no matter how annoying or dim-witted he was. What amazed her even more was that his Junin sensei or precious Iruka sensei didn't think to at least teach him the most basic of taijutsu stances. Even if she was just using him to take out Orochimaru, she didn't want her weapon to be in low spirits all the time. It made her feel bad about her own problems. Clearing her throat, she put on her cockiest smile and pointed forcefully at her escort. Stop looking like the pitiful brat you were and get back into that stance. I'll tell you what to do from there. She thought she saw a spark appear in his eyes as he immediately straightened up, albeit a little less sure of himself. First of all, your weight should be on your back leg good. Now, turn your front foot in a bit to give yourself more balance. Doesn't that feel better? You'll be able to move much more efficiently like that. He looked over his shoulder and smirked. Looks like I'll really have to start calling you Tayuya-sensei now, eh? Naruto joked, testing out the new form. He had to admit that it felt much more natural than the one Mizuki taught him. Tayuya flushed slightly and scowled. Shut the up, I ain't doing this 'cause I like you or anything. I just don't want you to get your ass kicked by Orochimaru. Besides, this is the most basic form there is. Now lift your back arm up near your chest a little higher. Perfect. Stretch your other arm out in front of you, not all the way out. Dipshit, yeah, that's good. Now you can strike and block from pretty much any angle, and move in nearly any direction. She smirked smugly as he took a few practice punches and kicks, looking much better than he did only 10 minutes ago. Yes. Thanks, Tayuya, she shrugged and waved him off. Don't thank me yet, you haven't used it in an actual fight. He smirked and put his hands together in a familiar sign. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. A shadow clone popped into existence, much to the surprise of the former Sound Nin. Holy, you never cease to amaze me. He smiled genuinely at the girl before settling himself into the new stance and sparring with his shadow clone. She couldn't keep a tiny smirk from slipping its way onto her face as she watched him. By the time she was done, Orochimaru won't know what hit him. Both genin were oblivious to the angry pair of eyes watching their every move. Naruto sparred for a few more hours, even going as far as to create 10 shadow clones to fight against. Every few minutes, Tayuya would call out tips or admonishments. Most of them starting with an insult, of course. As time went on, the insults gradually turned into compliments, and she even began to hold back on the name calling. Sometime during his training, he'd shed his jacket and thrown it towards the foul-mouthed redhead, causing the name calling to resume full force. After a while, she became silent. I must be doing pretty good, Naruto thought as he crouched down onto the ground, breathing heavily and glancing up at the night sky. The stars and moon were glowing brilliantly, a sign that it was at least after 8. He didn't realize so much time had passed since they'd left the academy. Oi, Tayuya, ready to go back? He called over his temporary teammate. When she didn't answer, He reluctantly stood and walked over to where she was reclining against the large tree. Tayuya. Looking closer, he realized that her eyes were closed, and her head was tilted off to the side at an awkward angle. It didn't take a genius to see that she was asleep. His discarded jacket was spread out over her torso, probably to ward off the cold. It did tend to get pretty cool in Konoha, after all. The genin stared a moment longer before reaching over to pick the girl up. What he didn't count on was her fist shooting up and punching him square in the jaw, sending him sprawling 5 feet into an adjacent tree. The girl blinked sleepily and yawned, rubbing at her eyes with the offending hand. Must have fallen asleep, she thought to herself, noticing it wasn't light outside anymore. She glanced at the area where Naruto had been training, only to see a battered training log and a few ninja weapons spread out on the ground. However, there was no sign of her blonde escort. A small pang of anger washed over the girl. That bastard deserted me, she shrieked in her mind, already thinking of ways to cause the genin pain. That is until she heard a strangled groan coming from her left. Tayuya snapped her head around to see Naruto lying sideways against a thick oak tree, tending to a large bruise on his cheek. She blinked in surprise. What the happened to you? Naruto glared at her and rolled himself onto his hands and knees. What happened? You punched me, he yelled, waving his arms in an exaggerated fashion. The girl blinked again. I did? She glanced down at her fist in surprise. Good to see my reflexes haven't dulled any. Yeah, what? Do you think I hit myself? Damned if I know. You might be some kind of masochist. A maso. What? Tayuya shook her head in exasperation. Holy shit, you're stupid. Just put me in my chair and get me back to the hellhole you call a hospital. Shooting her one last glare, the blonde stood up and walked over to the crippled genin. He pulled his jacket off of her first, attempting to put it on. The girl shivered and grabbed a hold of one of the sleeves. When he stared at her questioningly, she scowled and tugged on the sleeve a little harder. It's cold as shit out here. Be a gentleman and let me use your jacket. She meant for it to be a suggestion, but it came out as more of a command. Will you be quiet and go back to the hospital peacefully if I do? He asked, patting himself on the back for coming up with such a great idea. She nodded and pulled the jacket from his grip, immediately wrapping it around herself to ward off the persistent cold. After regaining a bit of her warmth from the heavy material of the bright orange jacket, Tayuya lifted an arm towards her escort. Hurry up, I'm freezing my ass off out here. Naruto scowled but bent down to pick her up bridal style. She wrapped her good arm around his neck and nodded after she established a firm enough grip. As he ascended to a standing position, both felt a small wave of killing intent from the forest around them. What the hell was that? He asked, looking around for any sign of life. Tayuya was doing the same, immediately going into ninja mode despite her handicaps. I don't know, but we'd better get thee out of here before whatever it is decides to make itself known. Quickly setting her back into her wheelchair, Naruto formed some chakra in his feet and dashed off towards civilization while occasionally glancing over his shoulder to see if anyone was following them. Even as they ran, they felt the strange presence following them, the foul aura getting stronger and stronger with each step. Before long, they reached the densely populated market district. Thankfully, the killing intent immediately disappeared, allowing the genin to slow his pace to a brisk walk. That was scary. He breathed, attempting to regain his breath back after the sprint. Normally he wouldn't be so tired, but he just spent the better part of the afternoon training his taijutsu. The girl nodded in agreement, trying to catch her own breath despite not doing anything. Yeah, that was like some Freddy Krueger shit. Both genin paused for a moment before bursting out into laughter. Civilians and ninja alike wisely edged their way around the howling teens, unsure as to whether they were psychotic or not. It took well over a minute for them to calm down enough to keep moving, although they both sported equally wide grins. A fact which still managed to creep out most of the citizens they came across. As they walked deeper into the market district of Konoha, Tayuya soon became aware of the glares and frowns sent their way. A few of the people muttered words under their breath, none that she could hear over the increasingly loud chatter. She glanced up to see that her escort was still grinning, albeit it was slightly strained from her vantage point. Oi, Dobi. What's with these shitheads? I thought the bimbo didn't tell anyone where I was from. His smile slipped a bit before widening into a full foxy grin. Oh, they're just upset about some pranks I pulled a while back. He lied, skillfully skipping around the truth. It wouldn't do any good for her to know about the Kyuubi. She eyed him for a few seconds before shrugging it off. It wasn't her job to cross-examine the boy. You must have pulled some good ones, 'cause they look angry enough to slit your throat in your sleep or something. Naruto made an abrupt stop, nearly throwing the girl from her wheelchair. Her statement brought back some painful memories from his childhood. I thought you were supposed to be quiet, he said, his voice deathly cold. Tayuya looked taken aback at his sudden change in emotion. What the shit? Is he bipolar? She wondered, taking note of his dejected expression. Her face soon deepened into a scowl as she turned around and faced forward again. What the hell did she care? It wasn't her fault the bastard had deep-seated problems. He soon began pushing her towards the hospital, though at a much quicker pace than they'd been traveling at before. 5 minutes later, they arrived at the door to room 223. Even as he lifted her frail body onto the hospital bed, they didn't speak. He stared at her prone form for a few seconds, watching how the moonlight illuminated her features as she glared out of the window to her right. Naruto walked back to the doorway in silence, opening the door with a soft click. I'm sorry, he whispered, much to the girl's surprise. She snapped her head around to reply, but found that he'd already disappeared down the hallway. The smallest of smirks made its way onto her face. Idiot. Gah. A feminine voice yelled while tossing papers into the air. Where is it? Where? The fifth Hokage was currently tearing her office apart, looking for her last bottle of sake. She knew she had another bottle left. She'd just restocked her secret stash yesterday. A perverted chuckle resounded in the nearly empty room. Lose something, Tsunade? The woman in question clenched her fists a few times to get rid of the stress that was steadily building up in her system. Turning to the window, she forced an angry grin onto her face. You wouldn't happen to know where my last bottle of sake went, would you, Jiraiya? Jiraiya chuckled and took a swig from the bottle resting in his hand. Giving her a cheeky grin, he shook his head. Nope, not a clue. That was it. With a blood-curdling scream, the Godem launched herself at her former teammate, fully intending to rip his spine from his body. The Sannin deftly dodged her advances with a leering grin. My, Tsunadeheim. I knew you wanted me, but this is a bit desperate, even for you. She took a few deep breaths to calm herself down. How the hell did you slip past all of the Anbu guards? The Toad Hermit rolled his eyes. Those guys? PFF'd. They don't call me a legendary Sannin for nothing, you know, he said with a cocky wave of his hand. She sighed in exasperation. What do you want? His expression immediately became serious, a sure sign that this was important. Dear Kami, she wished she had her sake. It's about Naruto. Tsunade groaned in response. Akatsuki? She asked, hoping against hope that it was something smaller. Much to her chagrin, he nodded. Yeah. Judging from the information I received on my spy network, they're going to start moving in 3 years. As you know, Itachi and Kisame are quite powerful S-rank Nukenin. I wouldn't stand a chance against both of them while trying to protect the kid at the same time. Tsunade sighed and buried her face into her hands. That's not it. I can tell. Even though he knew she couldn't see it, he shook his head and sighed. Not only are Akatsuki planning on kidnapping Naruto, but there is a rumor going around that Orochimaru's cooking up a war against Konoha right after he transfers to Sasuke's body. Iwa and Kumo are also rumored to be in on this war. They both have large grudges against Konoha, you know. Tsunade groaned loudly, desperately wishing she had even a sip of sake. So what is it that you want? She asked, not moving from her position. I want to take Naruto on a training trip for 3 years. I'll teach him how to use the Kyuubi's chakra effectively, and also a few other things like tracking and battle strategy. This way, he'll be able to defend himself against Akatsuki's attacks and possibly be a defining factor in the war with Otogakure. No, Jiraiya nearly fell from his perch on the windowsill. No, why the hell not? Have you been listening to the things I've been telling you for the past 5 minutes? She lifted her head to glare pitifully at her teammate. I need him here to gather information on Orochimaru from a former sound nin. He frowned deeply in response. Just turn the bastard over to Ibiki. You know how good he is at interrogation. It is of the utmost importance that I teach Naruto everything he needs to know before the Akatsuki decide to move. It's complicated. I can't just turn her over to Ibiki, it wouldn't work. Jiraiya's eyes suddenly got a knowing twinkle. Realizing that she'd said too much, the Godem hung her head. He chuckled loudly and hopped down into the room. Dear Tsunadeheim, what have I told you about meddling? Shut up. If it's that important to you, why don't I bring her along? You can assign a Junin to keep an eye on her while I train Naruto. She groaned for the second time that night. That won't work either. 1. The girl can't walk. The bones in her legs are far too damaged for me to do anything about it, and nothing short of regeneration will fix them. 2. There isn't a Junin on the force who would take this job that I can afford to let go. Jiraiya frowned in thought. You know, now that I think about it, this could really work out for the best. If Naruto is able to get the information from the girl before the 3 years are up, we could attack Orochimaru before he transfers to Sasuke and attacks us. By that time, Naruto will be plenty strong enough to take on Akatsuki and Sasuke. I'm a genius. Tsunade blinked in frustration. Did you not just hear a word I said? The girl cannot walk. She will never walk, she said, speaking in a voice she'd use as if she were talking to a toddler. And there isn't a Junin on the force who I can afford to let go. Must I repeat it again, Baka? The man chuckled and waved his hand. So her bones are practically dust. Big deal, he said, shrugging his shoulders. Tell me, Tsunade, how does your Genesis rebirth technique work? Tsunade stared at him as if he'd grown a third head. You should remember, you helped me make it. By releasing the chakra stored up in my forehead seal, I can instantly heal all of my wounds and even regrow limbs and organs if I need. At this point her eyes widened in realization. She jumped to her feet and began to pace around the office, arms flailing around in excitement. That's it, if we can recreate the same technique on Tayuya, she'll easily be able to restore her bones to their previous state. Jiraiya, you're a genius, he smiled and nodded in agreement. I know, you don't have to tell me. After her initial excitement wore off, she immediately slouched back onto her desk. But how will it work? We don't have the time for her to build up the chakra on her own, and neither of us has enough chakra to force into the seal ourselves. Hell, we don't even know how to cancel the technique after the required healing is complete. Jiraiya grinned as if expecting this response. Are you forgetting who I am? Besides the #1 super pervert of Konoha, I am also a master of seals. I'm much more experienced than I was when we created your technique, Tsunadeheim. Give me a week and I'll cook something up. As for the required chakra, I happen to know a certain genin who has more chakra than an entire Anbu squad, she smirked. You really are a genius, you know that? The hermit flashed her one of the true smiles he reserved for those closest to him. I know, dear, I know. Now, you'll have to find a Junin on your own, Tsunadeheim, but you can leave the seals to me. Noticing that she was lost in her own thoughts, he snuck up behind the slug Sanin and quickly groped her breasts. Oh, still as lovely as I remember, he sighed before slipping out of the window. It wasn't until 5 minutes later that the Hokage realized what he had done. Jiraiya. 10:59. Where is he? Tayuya glanced at the clock again, sighing wearily to herself. Here she was, dressed and ready to go, and he was nearly half an hour late. Not that she was in any hurry to go on a cross-village journey to the academy with the blonde idiot. No, she simply wanted to get out of this cold, impersonal room and out into the warm air of Konoha. Her eyes darkened slightly as she remembered the small spat they'd had last night. She was starting to believe that he wasn't even going to show, something that strangely upset her. I don't even know what the hell he was so angry about, she thought, remembering the extremely cold voice he had regarded her with. The genin sighed again and flopped back onto the bed, resigning herself to a day of lounging. Suddenly, she noticed a piece of bright orange cloth resting on the ground beside her. She stretched out to pick it up and recognized it as the same jacket Naruto had loaned to her the night before. TCH, the idiot forgot to take his shitty jacket with him. She fingered the thick material of the coat. Glancing at the door one more time to make sure no one was coming in, Tayuya lifted the jacket to her nose and took a slight whiff. It smells like ramen. A sudden opening of the door surprised her out of her thoughts, and she quickly threw the garment back onto the floor. Tsunade's apprentice stepped through the door and blinked in surprise. Sorry, I thought you'd be gone by now. The woman glanced at the clock resting on the table to Tayuya's left. Where's Naruto-kun? Aren't you two supposed to go to the academy today? Instead of answering, the girl snorted and looked away, occupying herself with watching a few bluebirds hop around and titter on the windowsill. Shizune smiled and moved to check the genin's medical chart. I know you're waiting for him. You can't fool me. Again, she didn't reply. He's strong, you know. He took on Orochimaru twice. The medic nin muttered, attempting to bait the girl into a conversation. She still had her suspicions about the former sound nin after all. TCH, yeah right. The older woman smirked behind the chart. Hook, line, and sinker. Oh, it's true. Once during the Chunin exams, and once when he accompanied Jiraiya-sama to find the Hokage. By this time, she had the genin's full attention. Yep, he even learned one of the fourth's legendary techniques in only a week. Okay, so she was stretching it a bit. He'd actually only learned the last step in a week, and required the use of a clone to execute it. But she didn't need to know that. Tayuya on the other hand was floored. She wasn't from Konoha, but she'd definitely heard of the fourth Hokage. It was hard not to hear about a man who killed over 1,000 Iwakagore ninja in under 10 minutes. Not to mention that every now and then Orochimaru would mutter things about the Yellow Flash stealing his rightful position as the Hokage. You're shitting me. Shizune shook her head. Nope. I also heard that he defeated Sabaku no Gara, the demon vessel of the Shukaku. Tayuya's jaw was practically on the floor by now. Are we talking about the same Naruto? Blonde hair, stupid face, gay-ass bright orange jumpsuit? Tsunade's apprentice nodded and set the chart back in its resting spot near the end of the bed. Huh. Maybe he's not as stupid as he looks. He's still one luckier to face Orochimaru twice and live. I assure you, luck had nothing to do with it. Before the genin could say anything else, Naruto burst through the door, breathing heavily as he tried to form a coherent sentence. Sorry. Late. Overslept. He breathed between gasps. Shizune smiled fondly at her surrogate little brother. He glanced up and grinned widely at the woman. Hey, Shizune-chan. She nodded in response and slipped out of the door to hide her growing grin. She could always come back later and find out what she needed to know about the girl. You'd better hurry up and get to the academy, Naruto-kun. Your friend looks a little antsy. The medic called from over her shoulder. The blonde stared at Tayuya and lifted an inquiring eyebrow. Ready to go? He asked, scratching nervously at the back of his head. Tayuya scowled at him, but nodded. He quickly grabbed the wheelchair resting by the doorway and wheeled it over to his teammate's bedside. Do you think the kids will be mad that we're late? The boy inquired, setting her down in the chair. She shrugged slightly and picked up the orange jacket she'd discarded earlier, draping it haphazardly over her lap. Who gives a shit? It's not like they can do anything about it. Well, since you don't care, I'll make sure I tell them it's your fault. What? Oh, hell no, you're taking the fall for this one. I thought you didn't care. I just don't like being blamed for shit I didn't do. Sounds like fear to me. With a well-placed elbow to his side, Tayuya quickly ended the argument. She frowned and pointed towards the door. Push. Yes, Tayuyaheim, he drawled sarcastically, dodging another elbow. To say that the kindergarteners were upset would be an understatement. Every single one of the children were glaring maliciously at the teens, even causing Naruto to take an unconscious step back. The Chunin instructor shot them a look of pity before quickly performing a shunshin out of the room. Bastard. Tayuya mumbled, glaring at the spot where the Chunin had previously been standing. She was broken from her thoughts when a large book was shoved into her hand, and the same little girl from the day before hopped into her lap without a word. Not wanting to provoke the children into doing something rash, because they were, in fact, demons in disguise, the genin immediately popped open the book and turned to where they left off. Naruto had already settled himself among the kids, although he glanced nervously at them every few seconds. Yep, the little bastards were definitely demons. Tayuya. Can you start reading? Her escort asked, motioning towards the impatient and murderous-looking students. She nodded and cleared her throat harshly before beginning. Everyone knows where we left off, right? After receiving a stiff nod of consent from the kids, she continued. Just as he was about to enter his home, a golden fox appeared and snarled angrily at the snake. Let her go. The fox boomed, taking a large step forward. The giant white snake smiled and looked down at the fox. Little fox, do you think that you can defeat me in battle? Run along before I eat you too? She made sure to change her voice to fit the characters, actually somewhat enjoying herself. It sure beats sitting in hospital bed all day. The children gasped and murmured amongst themselves. If the snake ate the fox, what would happen to the princess? She took a quick surveying look around the room before continuing. The fox was afraid, but he stood his ground. He launched himself at the snake, only to be knocked into a tree by the snake's giant head. The princess gasped in horror. No, not my friend the fox. She screamed, struggling against the snake's tight hold. Don't worry about me, save yourself. But the fox only shook his head and smiled. As long as I have an ounce of breath left in my body, I will always protect you. Frowning, the snake launched himself at the wounded fox. I told you not to meddle, and now you shall die. Tayuya glanced up at the clock and grinned evilly to herself. She snapped the book shut and set it down in her lap. Sorry kids, it's snack time. Every jaw in the room dropped, including Naruto's. Not again. Tell us what happens to Fox, please. The red-haired genin only shook her head and smiled. Blame Naruto for getting us here late. The children's eyes drifted over to the genin sitting nervously in the middle of the classroom. I overslept? He whimpered, not liking the glares he was getting. Get him. The sound of the Kyuubi cantainer's screams could be heard all over the village, giving a few old women heart attacks and causing visitors waiting to get into Konoha to flee in terror. 10 minutes and one beat down later, the genin made a quick retreat out of the academy. Ow. Who knew kids that small could hit that hard? Naruto asked, rubbing at a bruise on his cheek. Thankfully, he managed to protect his more sensitive areas from the irate kindergarteners. Tayuya snorted. Serves you right for being late, bastard, he grunted in response. They walked along in silence, a fact which didn't go unnoticed by the redhead. Unable to suppress her curiosity, she glanced up at Naruto. Amazingly enough, all of his bruises and cuts had already healed from his earlier beatdown. Holy shit, no wonder he survived after facing Orochimaru. Her eyes traveled from his injuries to his deep, cerulean eyes. While he was certainly aware of what was going on around him, his mind was quite obviously somewhere else. She could see the faraway look in his eyes, and couldn't help but wonder what he was thinking about. Naruto on the other hand was deep in thought, completely oblivious to the curious stare of the ill-tempered girl. His hands tightened around the handles of the wheelchair as he thought of his fight with Sasuke. He hadn't had much time to think about it, only briefly reflecting on his feelings before falling asleep or while training. However, Sasuke's words constantly reverberated in his head. You are my closest friend, Naruto, and that is why I must kill you. It just didn't make any sense. Why would he want to kill his closest friend? His blank gaze hardened slightly as he thought about his training. While he would try his hardest to become strong, it was hard to deny the cold hard fact that he would never be able to match Sasuke if they met again. The bastard was getting training from the legendary Sannin, after all. For the first time since he became a genin, Naruto felt weak. Tayuya was getting a kick out of the emotions playing over his face. First, he looked angry, then sad, then confused, then angry again before his face finally settled on depressed. She sighed and rolled her eyes in disgust. The idiot was probably thinking about Sasuke again. An odd feeling of jealousy resounded in her heart. If there was one thing she hated in life, it was being overlooked. Orochimaru had done it plenty of times with issues regarding the Sound Five, especially when it came to Kimimaro. After he'd arrived, her leader couldn't stop talking about how great his bloodline limit was, or how easily he would crush Konoha when the time came. Hell, if the bastard hadn't fallen ill before Orochimaru could transfer into his body, she doubted the snake would have given her any decent training at all. She'd be damned if Naruto overlooked her in favor of the faggot Uchiha. Oi, shithead. Wake up. A few of the older villagers stared in shock at the girl's random outburst, appalled that the new generation of ninja had such filthy mouths. Much to her chagrin, the boy made no movement to show that he'd heard her. She scowled in annoyance. How dare he ignore her? Using all of her strength, she launched an elbow straight into his unsuspecting gut. Ouch. What the hell, Tayuya? He yelled, rubbing at his stomach. She noticed with some satisfaction that the pain didn't seem to disappear as quickly as it did when their temporary students beat him up. If you'd stop dreaming about your gay lover, maybe I wouldn't have to elbow the shit out of you. I'm not gay, Naruto yelled, eyebrows furrowing in anger. Just the thought of being with Sasuke sent a disgusted shudder through his body. Tayuya was more than amused at the reaction she got from him. She made a mental note to insult his sexuality more often. Hey, you don't have to prove it to me. What you and the faggot Uchiha did before he turned traitor is your own damn business. Where the hell are we going, anyway? She asked, cutting him off before he could come up with a retort. A strange smile appeared on his face, almost as if he was never thinking about the Uchiha or her insults to his manhood. The best place in all of Konohagakure, he exclaimed, pumping an energetic fist into the air. The corners of her mouth involuntarily twitched upwards at his upbeat expression. Though she'd never admitted to anyone, his smile was extremely infectious. When Naruto said he was taking her to the best place in all of Konoha, she thought he was taking her somewhere truly magical. A secluded lake, an extremely upscale restaurant, or hell, even the local park. Never in a million years would she have ever guessed a ramen stand. Her eye twitched in annoyance. Oi, Oji-san. 2 bowls of miso. The blonde yelled, wheeling Tayuya into the small ramen stand. He didn't notice her clenching hand or her viciously annoyed expression. Not until she attempted to jab him in the balls, anyway. Luckily, he was just quick enough to take a hasty step back. Baka. I thought you said we were going to the best place in all of Konoha? She complained, slightly irked that she'd missed her target. Naruto looked dumbfounded at her question. But, this is the best place in all of Konoha. The people here are really nice, and the food is the best. Just give it a chance, I swear you won't be disappointed. Please, Tayuya? He whimpered, using the infamous puppy dog eyes. The redhead sighed harshly and hung her head in defeat. Between his pitiful expression and large, pleading eyes, it was hard to deny the boy his ramen. She doubted that she could hate him any more than she did right now. Wait, scratch that. There was no possible way that she could hate him any more than she did right now. Fine. This shit better be damn good, or so help me all. She said, allowing the ominous threat to hang in the air. Naruto grinned brightly and picked her up out of the wheelchair, setting her down on an empty stool. Well, at least it smells good, she thought, staring hungrily at the variety of toppings spread out behind the countertop. After a few days of eating nothing but hospital food, otherwise known as shit, ramen was a much welcomed change. Drool slowly began to seep out of the corner of her mouth, and her stomach began constricting painfully in hunger. Miss? Tayuya quickly snapped out of her hunger-induced coma to see a teenage girl with brown hair staring at her in concern. She didn't look like a ninja, so she was obviously a civilian. But why the hell would a civilian be talking to her? Caught off guard, the genin said the first intelligent thing that came to her mind. Wah? The civilian girl smiled brightly and lifted her notepad. I asked if you were ready to order. Oh, sure. I'll have whatever the hell he's having, she said, jerking a thumb at the blonde sitting to her left. Ayame nodded and relayed the order to her father, an old man with a seemingly gentle disposition. She could almost see why her escort liked the place. Despite its small size, the restaurant had a very cozy feel to it. It wasn't until a few seconds later that she realized Naruto was staring at her with something akin to shock. What the are you looking at? She asked, suspicious of the awestruck expression on his face. You don't want veggie ramen? Veggie ramen? What the would I want that shit for? He continued to stare at her as if the answer was obvious. Well, aren't you watching your figure? Are you calling me fat? Tayuya exclaimed, causing the old man to grimace in sympathy for the poor boy. Though he seemed like a pretty good ninja, the boy clearly had no skill with the ladies. Naruto on the other hand waved his hands in front of him defensively and subconsciously inched his way onto the opposite edge of the stool. And no. It's just that well, Ino and Sakura-chan are always on diets, and they always say that ramen's too fattening and that Sasuke Teme won't like them if they eat it and that if Sasuke Teme won't like them they'll never be happy and if they're not happy then I won't be happy cause then they'll want to beat me up for making them fat and... He rambled, hoping to avoid another beat down. Even if she was crippled, a woman scorned was still dangerous. She almost smirked at his fearful expression. I get the idea, dipshit. I just think it's stupid. Why the would a kunoichi need to be on a diet? Shit. We jump through trees and train nearly every day of our lives. That's exactly what I said, but then, Sakura-chan would just hit me on top of the head for being stupid, he said, shrugging and turning to the freshly made ramen the chef had just set down in front of them. Itadakamasu, Naruto exclaimed, wasting no time in grabbing his chopsticks and eating. He shuddered in pleasure as the noodles slipped down his throat. Oh, that's good. His partner watched in mild horror as he slurped, sipped, and gobbled his way through the entire bowl while at the same time relaying the gory details of his latest mission to the old chef. Damn, and I thought Hirobu could put it down fast. This guy puts the fat ass to shame, she thought, jaw nearly scraping the countertop. Nay, Tayuya, you should eat before your noodles get cold. They're not as good when they're all soggy and stuff, he said, already halfway through his second bowl. She was slightly amazed that he even remembered she was there. After all, it seemed as if he was in his own little ramen-filled world judging by the stupid grin plastered on his face as he ate. Deciding to take his advice, she broke her chopsticks and dug in with a quiet, itadakamasu. She placed a few of the noodles into her mouth, swishing them around a bit to get a good feel for the taste. She chewed the noodles slowly and swallowed. An eager Naruto watched nervously as the girl inspected and thoroughly examined the noodles. Well, what do you think? He asked, trying not to look too interested. Pretty good. Tayuya shrugged and grabbed a larger serving, stuffing them haphazardly into her mouth. Okay, so she wasn't the most refined eater in the world. Really? The girl nodded and swallowed again. Yep, best damn ramen I ever had. Of course, she neglected to mention that it was her first time ever eating professionally made ramen. Cup ramen didn't count. Her escort grinned widely. I think I can like you, he said, slurping a mouthful of noodles down his throat. The redhead sputtered noisily and choked on her ramen. What? Naruto turned to Tayuya and gave her a wide toothy grin. A grin that looked disturbingly similar to Rock Lee's. I said, I think I can like you. There are no bad people among ramen lovers. The girl scowled and bopped him over the head with her good hand, sending him plowing face first into his half-finished bowl of soup. Doby, don't say shit like that when I'm trying to eat. She angrily stabbed at her noodles and swallowed another large mouthful. Her escort grumbled and picked his face up out of the now empty bowl. Why do girls always hit me when I give them compliments? He whined, wiping at his face with the collar of his shirt. She grinned into her soup at his pitiful expression. Even if he was a dumbass, he was at least an amusing one. Drinking the last of her soup down, she glanced at the blonde out of the corner of her eye. Who's paying for this stuff anyway? Naruto reached into his pocket and pulled out Gama-chan. I am. Of course. Tayuya snorted slightly at his extremely goofy purse. Just when she thought he couldn't look any stupider, he pulls something like this. How can you even afford this shit? I thought you were dirt poor. He pouted and crossed his arms in front of him with a very childish expression his face. Hey, I'm not poor. I still have a lot of money left over from when we fought Zabuza and Hiku. And then that mission where I went to beat up Gaara, when I brought back Tsunade Obaa-chan, and then when we tried to bring back Sasuke. He shrugged and motioned for another bowl of ramen. One haven't even cashed in my other mission payments. Tayuya blinked stupidly at the boy. So why the are you wearing clothes that make you look a goddamn kunai target? Naruto grinned weakly. I like the color orange. She narrowed her eyes, but let the subject drop, for now. For some reason, that explanation didn't quite fly with her. It didn't matter to her though. Eventually, she'd make him get some new clothes. Maybe if he actually looked like a ninja, she'd have more faith in his ability to beat Orochimaru. TCH. Yeah right. 15 minutes and 5 bowls of ramen later. 1 for Tayuya, and 4 for Naruto. Ah, I'm stuffed. Naruto exclaimed, patting his stomach contentedly as they walked, and rolled, down the street. Nothing made him feel better than 5 or so bowls of Ichiraku ramen. Not even being able to land a hit on Sasuke when he had his Sharingan activated. He faltered momentarily at the thought of his former teammate. Even when he wasn't here he managed to haunt his thoughts. Where the hell does it all go? She asked in wonder. While Hirobu could probably, she couldn't judge how much Naruto ate after only meal with him. After all, stuffed down twice as much as her escort, for his reasonably small stature he'd eaten quite a load. The boy shrugged again, an action which was very quickly annoying the former sound nin. He'd shrugged, grinned, or completely brushed off nearly everything she'd asked for the past few days. She pushed those thoughts aside and glowered up at Naruto. Go somewhere with water. Huh? Tayuya bit back a groan, instead opting to roll her eyes. You're slow. We're going to train, aren't we? Find a place with some water. Yes, Tayuya Heim. He grumbled under his breath as he made a sharp left turn into the residential district. Stop calling me that, jackass. You call me way worse names. She gave him a rather unladylike snort. That's because you deserve it, dumb. Her breathing had become shallow, and her face was lightly flushed with rage. Screaming at the top of your lungs does that to a person. She couldn't help but feel extremely annoyed with the blonde. There was just something so annoying about him. Not even Kidomaru could piss her off to the point of screaming. Well, not every day at least. She'd usually just break an arm or 3 to get him off of her back, but she couldn't do the same to Naruto in her current condition. Unfortunate, that. We're here, Naruto yelled after what seemed like a minute later. Tayuya snapped out of her thoughts and shook her head in disbelief. Either he'd put on a major burst of speed since she'd screamed at him, or she really needed to stop zoning out. Taking a quick look around, she noticed that they were standing near a small stream set well into a large cluster of trees. There was plenty of shade from the tall trees in the area, and a few large, smooth stones littered the bank of the river. Perfect for a picnic or quick break between training sessions. The place looked relatively undisturbed, and she couldn't stop the curiosity that welled up inside of her. Damn her uncanny need to understand everything about the world around her. Damn it to hell. How the did you find a sweet-ass place like this? She asked, fighting to keep from sounding desperate. And if you shrug one more time I'll rip your mother spine out. Okay, so much for not sounding desperate. He frowned slightly at her words. He didn't so much mind the language as he did the threats and insults that came along with it. It was starting to remind him of Sasuke, though he'd never actually used the word dumb. This place. Ero Sennin brought me here when he was teaching me water walking. Tayuya bit the inside of her cheek to keep from smirking at the nickname. Ero Sennin. Yeah, he's really strong, but he's a super pervert. Why do you want me to find a place with water? The girl frowned slightly in thought. Well, since you already know how to walk on water, the only thing I can think of right now is training on the water. Naruto cocked his head in curiosity. Train on the water? Tayuya nodded and lifted her good arm into the air, a signal that she wanted to be picked up. After he walked over and picked her up out of the wheelchair, she pointed towards one of the larger flat rocks resting by the bank of the river. He, not so gently, set her down and jumped back to avoid her deadly left hook. Careful, idiot, she shouted, rubbing lightly at her rear end. He crossed his arms in indignation. Tell me what to do. Shooting one last piercing glare at her escort, she cleared her throat and raised her chin a little higher, subconsciously assuming a teaching role. I already did. Walk onto the water, get into the stance I showed you yesterday, and fight against a shitload of cage bunshin. Naruto blinked dumbly at her. What the hell will that do? Tayuya sighed loudly. Maybe if she could slip into the water and drown before he noticed, she could end her prolonged torture. She almost wished that she had chosen to go with Ibiki. At least they'd only annoy her a few hours a day. "Are you stupid, or are you just trying to piss me off?" she asked, giving him her most even glare. When he cocked his head again, she decided that he was just stupid. They'd definitely have to work on his brainpower over the next few years. "Okay, you know that you have to expel a certain amount of chakra to stay afloat, right?" The blonde nodded. "Now, imagine expelling chakra for nearly an hour straight, while at the same time staying focused enough to fight one of your own cage bunshin and trying to remember the stance I taught you yesterday." A little light bulb seemed to appear above his head. "I get it. I can improve my chakra control while at the same time working on my taijutsu. Man, I wish someone had taught me this before," he exclaimed, pulling off his shirt and shoes. As soon as he'd rolled his pants legs up to his knees, he hopped onto the water and immediately sunk to the bottom. The redhead's sweat dropped and shuffled closer to the edge of the rock. "Oi, Dobi, I thought you said you could walk on water." She waited for a few seconds before speaking. "Hey, Naruto. Did all that ramen make you too heavy to float?" she yelled again. A slight feeling of worry began to make its way into her stomach. He'd been under for at least a minute by now. Naruto. This shit ain't funny. By now, she was right on the edge of the rock, peering down in worry at the water. If he drowned, she'd be pretty much stuck alone in the middle of nowhere. She couldn't walk, and crawling would be too dangerous considering she didn't know the area well at all. Hell, she didn't even know if she was safe here. If the forest of death had giant snakes, tigers, and poisonous insects, who's to say that they weren't inhabiting these woods too? Just as she was about to panic, a sudden blast of water hit her square in the face, followed by a laughing hyperactive blonde. "Ha ha ha. You should see your face," Naruto shouted, rolling around on the grass next to the rock. "Oh man, I can't believe you fell for that." While he was laughing, he didn't notice Tayuya's clenching fist, or the fact that she'd shuffled her way within a foot of him. That is, until she punched him so hard he rebounded off of an adjacent tree and fell right back into the river. "Don't you ever do that again," she practically screamed through clenched teeth. His grin immediately disappeared as he crawled back onto the bank of the river. "I was just playing around," he stated, keeping a few feet away from the seething redhead. Tayuya struggled to calm down, even going as far as to dig her fingernails into the palm of her hand. His joke brought back painfully alarming memories of being abandoned as a child. It wasn't until Orochimaru found her that she had finally felt a glimmer of hope for the future. He'd offered her protection, power, and best of all, an escape from her own desperate loneliness. It wasn't until he had used the cursed seal against her that she realized exactly how much she meant to her leader. Absolutely nothing. After a few seconds of deep breathing, she finally managed to calm down enough to just glare coldly at him. Naruto stifled a gasp. Her eyes were the same as his own, laced with loneliness and pain. As quickly as it had appeared, it vanished. "Sorry. Just start training. It's going to get dark in a few hours." She shuffled back onto her rock and lay down, already tired of dealing with the many personalities of Uzumaki Naruto. "Shit, guess I'm still not at full health yet." The girl almost laughed out loud at the irony of her statement. The familiar sound of cage bunshins coming into existence reached her ears, signaling that the boy had finally decided to start training. She opened her eyes briefly to make sure that his form was correct, and was surprised to see that it was flawless. For a dead-last idiot, he was an extremely fast learner. Perhaps she could even teach him a few jutsu when she got her right arm out of the cast. Granted, most of her jutsu were related to her flute, but she at least had a few defensive dodenjutsus for backup. They would come in handy if Orochimaru decided to bust out some of the heavier kaiden jutsus he had in his vast collection. Tayuya watched as he ducked, weaved, dodged his shadow clones, every minute or so dispelling them one at a time. He'd started with 5 to warm up with, and after he easily took those down he doubled the number of clones to 10. A few minutes after, he had nearly 20 different shadow clones fighting him at once, all of them managing to stay afloat. Hell, most Junin couldn't even create 20 cage bunshins without suffering from chakra exhaustion, and here was a mere genin creating them by the buckets without even breaking a sweat. Despite being loud, annoying, and downright obnoxious, he truly was a remarkable kid. A small, pleasant feeling made itself known deep down in her heart, something she hadn't felt in years. Every part of his body ached. He trudged home on the dark, empty streets of Konoha, occasionally stopping to give his legs a quick break. After spending a few hours training, and, accidentally, splashing Tayuya with water, Naruto wanted nothing more than to get home, take a shower, and possibly get a few dozen hours of sleep. Alas, it was not to be. Naruto. He almost groaned in agony as he turned around to greet the person that had called his name. Why couldn't people ignore him when he wanted to be ignored? His eyes widened in near disbelief when he saw a familiar tuft of pink hair running full speed in his direction. "Sakura-chan, what are you doing out this late?" The girl panted briefly before grinning and standing up to her full height. "Guess what? I asked Tsunade-sama to teach me medical ninjutsu, and she agreed." Sakura practically screamed, her green eyes bright with excitement. Naruto playfully pouted and crossed his arms across his chest. "No fair. First Sasuke gets training from the snake bastard, and now you get training from Tsunade Obaa-chan. Everyone's getting trained by a Sanin except for me." His teammate stuck her tongue out mockingly. "Looks like it'll be up to me to bring Sasuke back, nay Naruto? You can be my backup." The boy lifted his chin and shifted into a slightly heroic pose. "Huh. I'll become stronger than both of you. I'm getting training from someone better." Sakura tilted her head in confusion. She hadn't seen him hanging out with anyone except for the loud-mouthed redhead. A feeling of dread settled in the bottom of her stomach. "You don't mean that foul-mouth, do you?" He shrugged his shoulders and started to walk home, motioning for her to walk with him. After the initial excitement of seeing his crush for the first time in 3 days wore off, he suddenly remembered exactly how tired he was. His knees threatened to give out on him at any moment, and the only thing he wanted to see was the back of his eyelids. "Tayuya? She's not that bad. She even fixed my taijutsu stance." Unfortunately, his teammate failed to share in his enthusiasm. The girl frowned and shook her head. "Naruto, I don't like her. There's something off about that girl." Naruto nervously scratched the back of his head. If she found out that Tayuya was one of the ninja who helped kidnap Sasuke, there's no telling what would happen. The entire village would be after the former Sound Nin, and himself by association. "What do you mean, Sakura-chan? She's okay once you get to know her. Don't you remember? She said we'd never be able to beat Orochimaru. I don't think you should hang out with someone that has such a negative attitude." The blonde resisted the urge to sigh in relief. Thankfully, she didn't even suspect that she was a former enemy ninja. She also has a strange aura about her. "Where is she from, anyway?" Of course, he spoke too soon. "Ah. Well, Kakashi-sensei found her on the outskirts of the village. Someone attacked her," he said, trying not to lie to his crush. "Half the truth is better than none," says Jiraiya. "Anyway. As long as she doesn't ask what village she's from, I should be fine." With this resolve in mind, he picked up his pace a bit. "Oh, that's horrible. What village is she from? Damn it. Oh, there's my apartment building, later, Sakura-chan." Before she could answer, he gathered as much chakra as he could muster, which wasn't much, into his feet and sprinted towards the safety of his apartment, ignoring the screaming pain in his legs to avoid the questions of his teammate. Sakura stood stunned in the middle of the street. This was strange behavior, even for Naruto. He scaled the stairs with practiced ease, not stopping until he was right in front of his own door. He felt bad about abandoning his crush, but brushed the guilty feeling off and moved to unlock his door. Once inside, the boy shed his clothing and trudged the few steps to his bathroom. The apartment was very small, only containing a bed, table, small kitchen area, and a bathroom. A few potted plants were hung haphazardly in front of the window, contrasting greatly with the shabby state of his living quarters. It wasn't much, but it was home. He turned on the faucet of his shower and breathed a heavy sigh. If he can help it, Naruto never misses a shower. To him, showers are something sacred. The blistering hot water piercing his back always relaxes him, and somehow manages to push all of his troubles behind him. It is the only time he's able to fully let his guard down, and he wouldn't trade these 15 minutes of bliss for all the jutsu in the world. Well, that may have been stretching it a bit, but he wouldn't trade his shower time for anything less. He turned around and leaned his back against the wall, reveling in the comfortable atmosphere of the shower stall. His mind unwillingly began to drift to the day's events, briefly recalling every move or action he'd made during his training. It didn't take long for him to remember the grief-stricken face of Tayuya when he'd pretended to drown, nor the bone-chilling glare she'd given him when he emerged. He made a mental note to never play a prank on her again. At least, ones that involved faking death. Still, he wondered why she would even care if he drowned or not. In their time together, she barely seemed to tolerate him, let alone care for his well-being, chalking it up as another girl thing. He reached for his shampoo bottle and squirted a generous amount onto his messy mop of hair. He used his nails to fiercely scrub his scalp, although he doubted his hair was very dirty. Especially since he spent the better part of the evening submerged in a river. "I have to do something to make it up to her," he thought, quickly hopping out of the shower and slipping into his night clothes. It was a warm night, so he decided to allow his body to air dry. He dove under his sheets and attempted to quickly fall asleep. If he lie awake too long, he began thinking of Sasuke. His brain would continue to replay their time together in his mind, searching for the point where he had gone wrong with his surrogate brother. As far as he could tell, Sasuke had been content working with he and Sakura-chan. Searching for lost cats, trying to find out what was under Kakashi-sensei's mask, catching a quick bowl of ramen after a mission. All of the things they enjoyed doing together as a team. He clenched his fists in anger. It was all Orochimaru's fault. That snake bastard was going to pay for taking away one of his precious people. He swore on his life, Orochimaru would die. Drip. 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 Tayuya grit her teeth in annoyance. After refilling her pitcher for the night, the nurse had failed to turn the water faucet all the way off. She'd had an incredibly hard time falling asleep. The only thing that calmed her mind enough to sleep was the image of her ogres beating the shit out of the neglectful old witch. Even after she'd constantly pushed the call button for nearly an hour, the elderly bitch hadn't come back to the room. The girl let loose a frustrated growl, banging her head back against the wall to block out the monotonous noise. Please don't do that. You just recovered from your head wound a few days ago. Tayuya snapped her head around to look into the amused eyes of the slug Sanin's apprentice. Between the constant banging of her head and the dripping faucet, the genin hadn't noticed that someone entered the room. Off, she screamed, her features dripping with desperation. Shizune tilted her head in confusion. Off? The woman asked, lowering Tayuya's medical chart to glance at the girl. The faucet. It's driving me batshit. With an understanding nod, the medical ninja quickly walked over to the sink and twisted the handle until the dripping stopped. The girl closed her eyes and sighed with relief. How long has this been on? She asked, frowning slightly. It wasn't like the nurses to be so neglectful of their patients. All night. Shizune's brows furrowed in disappointment. Do you know who the nurse was? Tayuya lifted a curious eyebrow. She was certain the woman knew that she was one of the 4 sound ninja who had an indirect hand in killing the 3rd Hokage. Some old bitch with wide-ass bottle-cap glasses. Why? The young woman lifted the medical chart and began scribbling away at a few things. Based on her description, it was the same nurse who'd lost her grandson in the joint attack by the sand and sound. Perhaps it wasn't so smart of the Hokage to let the veteran nurses know who the girl was. Tsunade-sama doesn't tolerate ill treatment of patients, no matter where they're from, she said, purposely looking up at the genin. Chances are, she'll be fired for prejudicial neglect. Tayuya smiled evilly at this statement. In the end, the last laugh would be hers. Nothing in life was better than revenge. Ha! Serves the bitch right. She yawned widely, not even attempting to cover her mouth. Now that the noise had stopped, she was finally able to get a few more hours of sleep. Her eyelids slowly began to droop, a fact which greatly amused Shizune. After giving the girl a quick checkup, she quietly slipped out of the room and headed towards her master's office. She was more than looking forward to the nurses' literal ejection from the hospital. 3 hours later, a small shadow crept along the halls, stealthily making its way towards the 2nd floor of the hospital. It soon reached the door to room 223. The very same room that held the former young Kunoichi from the sound. Twisting the doorknob slowly, the figure slipped into the room and gently shut the door behind them. Finally, you get what's coming to you, the person thought, grinning maliciously. The grin slipped momentarily as they noticed she was asleep. Damn, I thought she'd be up by now. Guess I have to. Naruto. What the are you doing? The blonde nearly jumped out of his skin when she spoke. Gah. I thought you were asleep. She lifted an eyebrow and eased herself up into a sitting position. Eyeing him carefully, she noticed a small bag hanging from his right hand. Dumbass, just because I can't use my legs doesn't mean that my ninja senses have dulled any. I was part of Orochimaru's elite guard. Tayuya deadpanned. She narrowed her eyes a bit in curiosity as she noticed that he was snickering. What? Naruto pointed to his left cheek and grinned. You have a little something on your face. Her hand shot up to her cheek to feel a sticky wetness smeared all over the left side of her face. She realized in horror that it was her drool. Unwillingly, her face began to heat up in embarrassment and she turned around to wipe the fluid off with the hospital bedsheets. She also raked her fingers through her hair in a sad attempt at giving it some order. Her hand suddenly froze in mid-stroke. What the hell am I doing? She wondered, quickly bringing her hand back down to her lap. For some reason, she felt humiliated that he had seen her in such a disheveled state. Her pride feeling somewhat bruised, she turned back around and practically snarled at the boy. Quit laughing at me, you low-life cocksucking motherer. Naruto blinked in surprise. She'd never used 3 insults in succession before. Something in the back of his mind told him that she was mad. Perhaps it was his common sense. He held up his hands in a placating fashion. I wasn't laughing at you, it's just that you looked so funny that. The boy paused in mid-sentence, briefly reflecting on his words. Oh, I guess I was laughing at you. Before the girl could say a word, he held up the bag hanging from his right hand. Wait. I brought food. Her mouth snapped shut in surprise. He'd brought her lunch. She fought to say something, anything, but the words somehow managed to escape her. Instead, she settled on a questioning glare. Grinning, Naruto reached into the bag and, unsurprisingly, handed her a large plastic container of ramen. Luckily, it was still warm. Thanks? Tayuya mumbled, her anger temporarily forgotten. His grin widened as he pulled up a chair. He reached into the bag and handed her a pair of chopsticks. I didn't know what kind you'd want, so I asked Oji-san to make me a super deluxe Naruto special. It has almost everything in it, the boy exclaimed. The redhead nodded and quickly broke her chopsticks. She was deathly hungry, especially since the nurse had forgotten to give her breakfast. Without wasting any time, she uttered a blessing and dug in. Naruto watched amazed as she voraciously inhaled the noodles, barely stopping to breathe. Every now and then, she'd stop to wipe her mouth. She had to maintain some sense of elegance after all, before returning full force to the food. Approximately 2 minutes later, Tayuya leaned back with a content sigh. Shit, that was good. She smiled and closed her eyes to relish in the warm feeling of the soup swimming around in her belly. She refused to acknowledge that the feeling could have possibly come from his act of kindness. Nay, Tayuya. The redhead lifted an eyelid to look at him. What? I was wondering. About yesterday. He muttered, looking anywhere but at her face. She opened both of her eyes and turned her head to look at him. What about it? Nothing, just wondering if you were still mad. A grunt resounded from the back of her throat. It was hard to believe that he was still worried over something that happened a day ago. Why do you care? She asked, her curiosity getting the better of her. Naruto shrugged and finally lifted his head to look at her. Just do. Tayuya fought the urge to growl. No, I'm not mad. I'm still going to kick your ass, but I'm not mad. He grinned in relief. If she was still mad, she might not teach him anything else. She pushed herself back into an upright position and set the bowl down on the tray next to her. What are you doing here anyway? It's Saturday. You don't have to take me to the academy. The boy gave her a confused glance. Aren't you still going to train me? Tayuya blinked. She honestly didn't expect him to be able to train after the brutal exercise she'd put him through the day before. The girl sighed loudly. Though she was secretly glad to be leaving the hospital, she didn't want him to know it. Well, if you want me to go, you have to get my shit out of those cabinets, she said, pointing towards the opposite wall. He walked over to cabinets and began to open the various doors. He soon emerged with a few folded pieces of clothing. This stuff? She nodded and took the clothing from him. Naruto pulled the curtain separating the room and plopped down on the other bed. Unable to help himself, he watched her silhouette in mild awe as she quickly pulled on her pants and ninja sandals. It was quite a feat considering that she only had one available hand. A small blush crept onto his face as he watched her pull the hospital gown up and over her head. He couldn't see much, but just the thought of her bearing her chest in the same room was enough to get his heart pumping a fraction of a second faster. He shook his head ferociously and growled. What am I doing? I'm not a pervert like Ero Sennin, he thought, turning his entire body so as not to be tempted to look again. A small curse floated from the other side of the curtain. While it was easy for Tayuya to slip on her pants and shoes, the long-sleeved shirt required the assistance of a second person. She'd only been able to get her left arm through the sleeve, leaving the right side of her shirt hanging on her shoulder. Even worse, the bastards hadn't even given her a bra. Blushing mildly, she cleared her throat and glanced hesitantly at the curtain. Naruto. She muttered, barely believing what she was about to ask him. Can you, help me? Naruto choked and nearly fell off of the bed. Why do you need my help? The girl nervously bit her lip. He was the last person she wanted to help her, but with her nurse's head on the chopping block, she doubted that there was anyone around to receive her call. With a resigned sigh, she shifted around so that her back was facing the other side of the room. She'd be damned if he got a peek at her more valuable assets. Just get thee over here, Naruto grunted and pulled back the curtain. Help me put my arm through the sleeve. And be careful, he nodded, although she couldn't see it, and hesitantly reached for her injured arm. Though he tried not to, he couldn't help but stare at the rich, ivory skin of her back. As he loosely grasped her arm, he briefly registered that it was his first time actually touching a female's skin. Getting punched in the face by Sakura didn't count. His thumb gently slid over the smooth surface of her arm. Soft. Naruto whispered unknowingly, eyes wide with interest. Tayuya tensed in mortification, feeling her blush deepen and spread across her cheeks. He was only the second male to compliment her on her physical appearance, not counting Sakin's offhand comments about how disgustingly graceful she looked while sparring. What did you just say? She stuttered, cursing her tongue for its impudence. Naruto blushed and quickly slipped her arm into the sleeve of the dark blue shirt. Nothing. Ready to go? He asked, abruptly turning to grab the collapsible wheelchair from the corner of the room. His cheeks burned red with embarrassment at his unintentional confession. On the other side of the room, Tayuya wasn't faring any better. As it usually did, her bashfulness was soon replaced by anger. How dare he try to cop a feel when her guard was down? When he reached down to pick her up, she launched a, not-so-fierce blow into his gut. Oomph, what was that for? For trying to feel me up, she screamed, more angry at herself for holding back on the punch. Her conscience was really starting to become a problem. I wasn't trying to feel you up, you're the one who asked for my help. He retorted. She huffed and lifted her arm to be picked up, a silent acknowledgement that he'd won. For a dumbass, he sure knew how to make a good point. Even someone as argumentative as she couldn't come up with a plausible enough comeback. He reached down again to pick her up, though warily, and set her down in the flimsy wheelchair. Where are we going today? Naruto asked as he wheeled her out of the room. She shrugged and leaned back in the chair. Who gives a? I can't teach you anything else in this state anyway. The chair slid to an abrupt stop, nearly throwing her headfirst to the ground. What? There has to be something you can teach me, he yelled, eyes wide with desperation. If this was as far as she could take him, Sasuke was going to wipe the floor with his ass. Well, there is something, but I don't think you'll be able to handle it. Tell me. I can do it, Tayuya smirked. He's so easy to manipulate. Hell, I bet I could get the bastard to strip if I wanted him to. She thought, her smirk growing a bit lecherous. She quickly dismissed that train of thought before it went places she didn't want to go. It's not like he had anything to show off anyway. All right, I'll tell you, but only on 2 conditions. 1. You can't complain even once about the training. He snorted with amusement. As if he would complain about training. And 2, you're not allowed to quit. That means no taijutsu, ninjutsu, or genjutsu until you've completely mastered this exercise. Got it? That's it? This'll be. He suddenly stopped in the middle of his sentence. Something didn't add up. If he wasn't going to be doing taijutsu, ninjutsu, or genjutsu, then what else was there to learn? He narrowed his eyes slightly and thought, though he certainly wasn't a genius, he wasn't nearly as stupid as he led others to believe. Even he could smell a trap a mile away. Wait a minute. This training must be something I won't like if you gave me those conditions. Tayuya's jaw nearly dropped into her lap. Since when did the Dobi grow a brain? She quickly regrouped and attacked from another angle. Who gives a? Either accept my conditions, or I don't train you. Naruto grimaced. While he had identified the trap, there was no clear way out of it. With a resigned sigh, he began pushing her towards the hospital elevator. Fine, you win. She smiled in triumph. At least that evened the score. Nay, Tayuya. What are you going to teach me? Naruto and Tayuya were currently resting on one of the large, flat rocks sitting near the river. They hadn't moved since they had arrived, which was around 15 minutes ago. Have you ever heard of leaf concentration? She asked, resting her head on the rock. Her escort's jacket was propped up behind her head as a makeshift pillow. She still hadn't given him his jacket back, and decided that she would keep it until he asked for it. It's not like he didn't have others at home. Naruto gave her a confused look. Leaf concentration. How does that work? She grinned and reached onto the grass for a leaf. After finding one, she motioned for him to come closer. I'm surprised you've never done it. Orochimaru told us that it was taught in the academy. She sat up and placed the leaf on her forehead. The object of this exercise is to keep the leaf from falling off of your forehead. In order to do this, you must concentrate all of your chakra onto the leaf. The boy frowned deeply. Wait, you're teaching me that? Iruka-sensei tried to teach me that when I was in the academy. It's boring. Did you ever learn how to do it? No, he mumbled, hanging his head in shame. Tayuya laughed. That explains why your chakra control is so shitty. You'll never beat Orochimaru if you can't use your chakra effectively. He snorted and crossed his arms. How does this help my chakra control? She knocked him over the head with her cast. I was getting to that part, dumbass. She cleared her throat and assumed the teacher role once again. This exercise actually trains concentration. By concentrating all of your energy on the leaf, your mind is able to focus much more efficiently, thus improving your chakra control. Do you get it? He nodded and plucked the leaf off of her forehead. It's kind of like when I was learning the Rasengan from Ero Sennin. When I drew a leaf onto my hand, I was able to pop the ball much easier than I did before. She blinked in confusion. Sure, whatever. Just get to work. He stuck his tongue out but placed the leaf on his forehead anyway, only to have it slip off a moment later. He placed the leaf on his forehead again, achieving the same results. After 25 or so failures, Tayuya sighed and slammed her head into her hand. It's obvious that we're not getting anywhere. Look, try this. Cross your legs and close your eyes. Remember, this is an exercise in concentration. Block out everything except the leaf. This is too hard, he whined, sticking his lip out in a pout. She bopped him over the head again. Remember the conditions? If you don't do this, I won't teach you anything else. Sasuke will you up and make you his bitch without my help. Naruto grit his teeth in anger. Though he hated to admit it, she was right. There was no way he could get strong enough on his own, and she knew a lot about Orochimaru's training methods. The same methods he would be using to teach Sasuke. He sighed and did as she said, much to her amusement. 2 for me, 1 for you. Amazingly enough, he was able to hold the leaf on his forehead for 3 seconds before it finally floated down into his lap. I did it! He screamed in triumph. She frowned and knocked him over the head again. Idiot, you have to hold the leaf on your forehead for at least an hour before we can move on. Nani? That long? But that'll take forever, she shrugged and motioned towards her legs. I'm not going anywhere. The longer it takes you to master this exercise, the easier it will be for Sasuke to kick your ass. Now get back to work. He mumbled something under his breath that sounded suspiciously like slave-driving bitch, before placing the leaf on his forehead and closing his eyes. Tayuya watched in mild awe as his time increased from a few seconds to a few minutes in only half an hour. When Orochimaru taught her this exercise, it took her the whole day to hold the leaf for 10 minutes, yet he was going to beat her time in only an hour. Of course, she was much more impatient and fiery than Naruto was when she learned this exercise, but it was amazing progress nonetheless. With his eyes closed, she figured it was safe enough to finally examine his features in detail. The first thing she examined was his unruly sunny blonde hair. Blonde was an incredibly rare color in the East, and she'd only seen 3 people with that hair color in Konoha. The current Hokage, Naruto, and the picture of the 4th hanging on the wall in the Hokage's office. She briefly wondered if Naruto and the 4th were related but quickly waved it off. As if that idiot could be related to someone as legendary as the Yellow Flash. She recalled reading about the Yamanaka clan in her earlier studies with Orochimaru, and remembered that they too had blonde hair and blue eyes. Perhaps he was a Yamanaka? She momentarily toyed with the idea, but again dismissed it. As far as she knew, he didn't know any mind transfer techniques. Instead of pondering his origins, she decided to ask him about it later and move on before he opened his eyes again to complain. Her eyes slowly traveled from his hair down to his strange whisker marks. After making sure he was still concentrating on the leaf, she leaned forward to get a better look at them. At first, she thought the whiskers were simply drawn on with face paint. Now that she was close enough to study them in detail, she was able to see the shallow grooves the lines made in his face. Huh. That's a weird birthmark, she thought, fighting the urge to reach out and touch them. Maybe his clan specializes in ninja cats or something. She snickered quietly at the thought and decided to finish looking at the rest of his features before she distracted him with her giggles. Tayuya leaned back again to take in his whole face. Combined with the whisker marks and his furrowed brows, his face seemed almost feral in appearance. His eyes were slightly slanted like a fox's, and her mind quickly conjured up the image of a ninja fox arranging his paws in a cross to perform the Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. She shook her head to clear the image, lest she break out in a fit of giggles. Her imagination could certainly be strange when it wanted to be. Just as she was about to finish her assessment of his appearance, Naruto's body suddenly slumped over, causing the leaf to float harmlessly to the rock below them. What the? There had been no visible indication that he was about to fall asleep, or she surely would have smacked him awake before he did. Naruto. Hey, shithead, wake up, she yelled, smacking him a few times on the head. When he didn't move, a small inkling of concern wormed its way into the bottom of her heart. This had better not be another joke. Naruto. Wake up. Hey. She stretched her arm out and splashed a little water into his face, hoping to at least get a small reaction from the blonde. This isn't funny anymore. Wake. Maybe you should let him sleep for a while. He looks pretty tired, don't you think? Tayuya snapped her around to the tree behind them. Who's there? Show yourself, she yelled, reaching for Naruto's weapon pouch. She grabbed a kunai and held it in front of herself and Naruto defensively. Her eyes widened when a ninja sauntered out of the trees, a wide grin nearly splitting their face in half. You? The ninja chuckled softly and brought a kunai of their own out, spinning it nonchalantly by the ring. My. What will you do now, Tayuya? Masumi, Tayuya snarled through clenched teeth. Out of all the ninja in the Sound Village, he was the one she least wanted to see. Orochimaru had sent him, along with Kabuto and Yoroi, to infiltrate the Chunin exams and study all of the genin to find potential warriors for the growing village of the Sound. Only Kabuto had returned, so she'd long since perceived them as dead. The Sound Nin pulled down his face mask and grinned. He was wearing simple black ninja pants, a black long-sleeved shirt, and a black Sound Chunin vest. I'm pleased to hear that you remember me, Tayuya-chan, he said, readjusting his glasses. She felt her lip curl at his jeering use of the chan suffix. What the are you doing here? Orochimaru wouldn't send someone as pathetic as you to finish me off. He laughed and hopped down from the tree, continuing to spin the kunai on his ring finger. Still as lively as ever, I see. Actually, Orochimaru-sama didn't assign me this mission. I requested it. She narrowed her eyes and inched closer to Naruto. He still wouldn't send your feeble ass alone to kill a former member of the Sound Five. You're right. Despite my protests, he insisted that I bring Yoroi along with me. Tayuya cursed audibly, her eyes darting around in every direction. There was no possible way that she could defend against two ninja in her current state. Hell, she barely stood a chance with just one. As if sensing her distress, the Sound Nin waved his hand dismissively. Don't worry, Tayuya-chan. After seeing your current injuries, I sent Yoroi on ahead to report our success to Orochimaru-sama. Satisfied for the moment, she glanced out of the corner of her eye at Naruto. What the hell did you do to him? She growled, making sure to keep the contortionist in her sight. He chuckled loudly at her question. Genjutsu. According to Kabuto, the boy has little to no talent for it. It was easy to place him under a low-level sleeping illusion. She winced slightly at his words. If we get out of this alive, I'm going to spend a whole month teaching him genjutsu, she thought, quickly forming a seal to cancel the genjutsu. Before she could tap Naruto on the shoulder to wake him up, Masumi appeared behind them and picked the blonde up by his shirt. Tisk. Have you really fallen so far as to rely on an idiot like this? He asked, grinning down at her mockingly. Tell me, what is he to you? She narrowed her eyes and scoffed. Thinking quickly, she concluded that it would be best for both of them if Naruto was able to live. Even if she died, he could at least fulfill her dream along with his own. He doesn't mean shit to me. I was simply using the fool to help me escape. Nothing more, nothing less. He stopped twirling the kunai and smiled. That's a relief. I thought you had finally gotten over me. You still love me, don't you, Tayuya-chan? She grit her teeth in anger, greatly resenting his cutting remarks. Though she hated to admit, Tayuya had been quite smitten with the Junin. Granted, she was only 9 at the time while he was practically an adult. The others had always teased her for her infatuation with the man, often calling her things like reverse pedophile and grave robber. It wasn't until he had ridiculed her for her ability to play the flute that she realized exactly how stupid her admiration of him was. It was also the day when she resolved to squash all of her weaker emotions in favor of power. You. He shook his head in mock exasperation. You haven't changed a bit, Tayuya-chan. He glanced up at the sun before returning his attention to the girl in front of him. While I'd love to catch up on old times, I really must be going. Yoroi's probably worried sick by now. With a sickeningly sweet grin, he stabbed the kunai into Naruto's heart and tossed him into the stream. Tayuya's hand went limp, causing the kunai to clatter harmlessly on the rock below her. She watched helplessly as his blood turned the small stream a shallow shade of red. Naruto! She screamed, her eyes involuntarily tearing up. For the third time in her life, she felt all of her hopes shatter into a million pieces. All her plans of killing Orochimaru and parading his head around on a stick were sinking to the bottom of the stream along with her partner. She curled her hand into a fist and snatched the kunai up off the rock. I'll kill you. With an angry swipe, she cut a large gash into the Sound Nin's thigh. He grimaced slightly and jumped back far enough to avoid any further attacks from the irate redhead. After making sure the wound wasn't too deep, he angrily stomped forward and picked the girl up by her throat. The condescending glint in his eyes was replaced by unbridled rage. That wasn't wise, Tayuya, he snarled, tightening his grip on her neck. She tried to stab at him again, but he viciously backhanded her hard across the face. The kunai slipped from her fingertips as her head snapped back from the blow. I was going to kill you fast, bitch, but now I'm going to make you suffer. He knelt down next to the stream and plunged her head under the water. Tayuya didn't bother struggling. As far as she was concerned, she was already dead. Not only were her legs ed up, but all of her hopes and ambitions for the future had died along with Naruto. Worst of all, he had died because of her. As the edges of her vision began to darken, She smiled and closed her eyes with deep remorse. I'm sorry, Naruto. Gah, what the hell happened? Naruto sat up and groggily opened his eyes. It took a few seconds for them to focus, but it took half that time to realize exactly where he was. He immediately recognized the dank, sooty walls and the dark, murky waters that made up the sewers of his mind. However, the broken pipes were dripping a little faster than they were before, and he noticed with some alarm that the area around him was slowly darkening. The only consistent light was the familiar red glow resonating from the Kyuubi's cage around the corner. He briefly weighed his options, and decided that visiting the Kyuubi was a much better idea than waiting to see what happens next. Sighing loudly, he reluctantly dragged his feet towards his prisoner. After what seemed like hours of walking, he finally stood before the giant golden gates that held the nine-tailed fox. Oi! Baka Kitsune! What's going on? He yelled, trying to see into the dark recesses of the cage. He was slightly worried that the nine-tailed fox had somehow managed to escape, and was currently on another rampage through Konoha while he was trapped inside of his own mind. A pair of glowing red eyes appeared from behind the bars, putting his worries to rest. We're dying, brat. Naruto blinked in surprise. He wasn't expecting a direct answer from the fox, and he certainly wasn't expecting to hear that he was going to die. Nani? What do you mean we're dying? What the hell did you do? The Kyuubi growled lowly at the boy. It was just like a human to blame someone else for their mistakes. I didn't do anything. It's because of your own clumsy negligence that you were stabbed through the heart by the enemy. By now, Naruto was frantically pulling at his hair. Death itself didn't scare him. It was the thought of the people he would be leaving behind that worried him. Shit. I can't die here. I have to bring Sasuke back. I have to marry Sakura-chan. I have to become the Hokage. He suddenly stopped in front of the cage and glared up at his prisoner. You're supposed to be the almighty Kyuubi, right? Do something. What looked like a scowl appeared on the demon's face. You've got a lot of guts to talk to the strongest of the great demons like that, brat. It narrowed its eyes in thought. Perhaps this situation could somehow work out in his favor. Look, kid, we have to act fast. This seal prevents me from releasing enough of my chakra into your system to heal you. If you release the seal right now, it will be easy for me to rebuild your heart. Naruto felt himself sweat drop. I'm not that stupid. The Kyuubi made a movement that looked suspiciously like a shrug. Deciding to take what he could get, the demon fox attacked from another angle. Fine. How about a deal? Naruto's ears perked up at this proposition. A deal? What kind of deal? He asked, glaring skeptically at the beast. I want more power. Before the genin could speak, the Kyuubi quickly continued, but it's not what you think. As you can probably imagine, it gets fairly boring in here after a while. So what is it that you want? Hurry it up, Baka Kitsune. The monster growled with considerable annoyance. If all humans were this annoying, he might honestly reconsider the offer he was about to make. Silence, mortal, he roared, effectively shutting the boy up. What I want is freedom. I want to see, smell, hear, taste, and feel everything that you do. I also want to be able to communicate with you, so that I can prevent any more of the foolish predicaments you tend to get yourself into. In return, I'll tell you how to access more of my chakra and rebuild your pathetic human heart. Naruto frowned in thought, trying to figure out what the bastard fox was up to. He was just about to agree when he suddenly remembered Gaara's situation, and how the Shukaku would constantly taunt and torment the Jinchuriki in his mind. There was no way in hell he would let the Kyuubi drive him crazy. The mischievous grin that suddenly appeared on his face made the Kyuubi slightly nervous. Fine, I accept your deal on one condition. I'm allowed to silence your voice whenever I want to. An angry growl resounded from the other side of the bars, confirming the fact that he'd exposed the demon's plan. It was obvious that the beast didn't have time to come up with another angle, as the light in the room was slowly beginning to diminish. He smiled cheekily and clasped his hands behind his head. Well? Fine. The beast roared, deciding to cut his losses and try again at a later time. Red chakra slowly began to seep out of the cage, bubbling up against Naruto's feet. Soon, the chakra hardened and grew, propelling him upwards towards the seal. Nani? I already told you that I'm not removing the seal, the beast sighed and shook his head. Idiot. You have to weaken the seal in order to receive more of my chakra. Hurry up, I can feel your body weakening. Nodding to himself, the genin reached a trembling hand towards the seal. Very carefully, he made a minuscule tear on the corner of the small piece of paper. The effect was immediate. A torrent of chakra shot towards the opposite wall, drowning the entire room in a malevolent sea of energy. Naruto found it incredibly hard to breathe, let alone move in the fluctuating surge of raw power. The Kyuubi roared with laughter at his jailer's shocked expression. What? What was that? That, he started, grinning with conceited pride, was approximately 1/100th of my power, brat. The blonde's jaw scraped the ground. He knew that the demon was powerful, but this was ridiculous. He suddenly had 10 times more respect for the fourth Hokage's strength. It couldn't have been easy to defeat a monster with such an insane amount of chakra. Get going, and let me have some fun, Naruto blinked, realizing that he'd completely missed whatever his prisoner had to say. Yeah, sure. You didn't hear a word I said, did you? The Kyuubi deadpanned. If he wasn't so disoriented, the boy would have laughed at the annoyed expression on the demon's face. A sigh escaped the beast, and with a swing of his paw, another wave of chakra shot Naruto out of the room and into the blinding light that made up his conscious. Tsurugi Masumi was having a wonderful day. Except for the shallow gash he had received from Tayuya, everything was going perfectly. His target was basically a one-armed vegetable, and as an added bonus, he had just killed the boy that Orochimaru had been bitching about for the past 2 months. He smiled and readjusted his glasses with his free hand. Orochimaru was sure to promote him to Junin for such an exceedingly successful mission. Absolutely nothing could ruin his day, not even a large, glowing red claw protruding from the stream and heading straight for his face. Shit. Before he could blink, the claw slashed him vertically across the face, sending both he and Tayuya sprawling across the ground. What the hell? He yelled, bewilderment clear in his voice. Tayuya, who had landed a few yards away from the Chunin, immediately began gasping for air. She didn't know what had happened, but she wasn't about to complain. After she regained a bit of her breath, she too began to look around the small tree-covered field for her savior. What she saw next astounded her. Naruto, who had just been stabbed through the heart by Masumi, was slowly rising out of the stream. A vicious swirl of red chakra surrounded him, turning the gentle water around him into steam. Naruto? She asked, her voice wavering with fear and disbelief. A gasp escaped her when he turned his blood-red eyes upon her trembling form. His pants were ripped off at the knees, and for the first time she noticed the spiraling seal on his stomach. The thin whisker marks of his cheeks now looked like abysmal scars, and his sharp pointy teeth were bared in her direction. If he didn't look so abominably scary at that moment, she might even say that he looked hot. Kami, she had some weird fetishes. Tayuya, are you all right? He asked, taking a concerned step towards her. As if moving on its own accord, her body quickly shuffled further into the forest, trying desperately to get away from rancorous-looking boy. His voice was different, almost animalistic in tone. Immense pain flashed through his eyes at her actions. It was the same look the villagers gave him every day of his life, but it hurt 10 times more when it was someone he actually cared about. Instead of taking another step towards Tayuya, he turned ferocious eyes upon the screaming man to his right. The sound nin was viciously clawing at his face, desperately trying to put out the chakra-induced flames caused by Naruto's initial blow. Naruto sauntered over to the fallen ninja with a furious smirk on his face. He was going to enjoy this. Does it hurt? He sneered, stopping in front of the man. He launched a powerful kick into the shinobi's gut, sending him back first into a tree. An audible crack was heard on contact. Stay back, demon. Masumi gasped between breaths. The Kyuubi-empowered genin laughed bitterly. Is that how you beg for your life? Naruto grabbed his head and slammed it face first into the ground. Is it? The man lifted his head and glared pitifully at Naruto. I'd never beg before a demon. The boy snarled and lifted him into the air by his neck. Wrong answer. He thrust a clawed hand through the sound nin's chest, instantly killing him. He stood there for a few minutes in that position, feeling Kyuubi's chakra slowly begin to drain from his system. His hand was still sticking out of Masumi's back, and blood ran in torrents down his forearm. It briefly registered in the back of his mind that it was his first kill. However, he was more concerned with the shivering girl staring at him with wide, fearful eyes. With a forceful pull, he wrenched his arm from the man's chest. The wet squelching sound seemed to snap her out of her daze as she suddenly seemed to notice the gaping hole in her former comrade's ribcage. He threw the body as far as he could towards the stream. What are you? She asked with fearful trepidation. Despite witnessing, and being the cause of, the death of over 100 people in her lifetime, none had ever been as gruesome as this one. She unconsciously burrowed herself further into the tree behind her as he began to walk in her direction. Tayuya. Please, Before he could finish his sentence, his legs suddenly gave out on him, causing him to crumble into a heap on the ground. Naruto. Tayuya screamed, immediately concerned about the blonde despite her fear. It took her a few minutes to stop her body from trembling, but she eventually managed to ease herself onto her stomach. Using her left arm, she slowly crawled her way towards Naruto. Her body seemed to be fighting against her every move, and it was through sheer willpower alone that she was able to reach him after what seemed like hours of crawling. She slid her body around so that she was leaning over the boy's head. It took her a few more minutes to get her nerve together, yet she somehow worked up enough courage to reach a shaky hand towards his neck. She quickly checked for a pulse and let loose a small sigh of relief when it throbbed powerfully against her fingertips. At least he was alive. She gently lifted his head and shuffled herself under him, allowing him to rest against her lap. Her body still quivered a bit with fear, but she ignored her anxiety in favor of the boy sleeping deeply between her legs. She pushed a few loose strands away from his eyes and smiled. "Thank you." The Godem Hokage sped through the rooftops at an alarmingly fast pace. Nearly every ninja above the level of Chunin had felt the evil chakra, and were now heading towards the outskirts of the village. Tsunade-sama, an Anbu captain, suddenly appeared to her left, his squad following closely behind him. His face was hidden by a mask, but his fear was evident in his movements. "What is it?" She noticed he seemed to hesitate before he spoke. It was obvious that it was something she didn't want to hear. "Tsunade-sama, the other captains and I feel as though it is in your best interest to return to your office. Please allow us to handle this." "No," the captain groaned from behind his mask. It was common knowledge to anyone who'd seen Naruto and the Hokage together that she had a major soft spot for the boy. There had even been rumors that she'd given him the first Hokage's necklace. Despite the obstacles, he was determined to make her see reason. "Tsunade-sama, please try to understand, the boy could be dangerous." Without breaking her stride, Tsunade threw a lightning-fast fist into the Anbu captain's face, breaking his mask and sending him spiraling towards the ground. The other members of his squad wisely slowed down enough to get out of striking range of the slug Sanin. "Temper, Tsunade," a voice chuckled. She snarled and threw another angry fist to her right. Jiraiya barely managed to duck under the blow. "Relax, I'm not trying to stop you," he exclaimed, placing his hands into the air as a sign of peace. "On the contrary, I'm just here to help. He is my student, you know." The woman's glare softened. "Do you think he's all right?" she asked, using chakra to gain a little extra speed. Jiraiya smirked confidently at his former teammate and matched her pace. "I know he is." Seemingly satisfied with his answer, she turned forward and put all of her energy into reaching Naruto as fast as she could. When they arrived in the clearing, the sight that met them was devastating. It wasn't the abnormally large craters or ruptured trees that surprised them. No, it was the copious amounts of blood and the mutilated body lying near the stream that sent a small sickening wave through their bodies. The Hokage slowly made her way towards the corpse, Jiraiya and a few Anbu squads close behind. She turned the body over and let loose a small sigh of relief. Judging by his headband, the man was from the Sound. She was immensely thankful that it wasn't one of their own shinobi, as that would have put her in an extremely difficult position. Except for the gaping hole in his chest and 5 large gashes across his face, there weren't many other injuries on the corpse. "Tsunade-sama, we've found him." Immediately forgetting about the corpse, she ran over to the Anbu officer's position. "Where is he?" The woman's eyes scanned the clearing until they landed on Tayuya. The girl had her back to them, but a small bit of blonde hair was peeking out from her lap. Fearing the worst, Tsunade rushed over to the genin. As she arrived, Tayuya slowly turned her head from Naruto to look up at Tsunade. Her face was eerily void of any emotion, but the woman noticed with some concern that she was trembling. She knelt down in front of Tayuya and placed a gentle hand against Naruto's jugular. "He's all right," she said, letting loose the breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. She moved to pick the boy up, but the redhead only tightened her grip on his head, glaring weakly at the woman. "We need to get them to the hospital," Jiraiya said, appearing behind her. His teammate nodded her head in agreement and began performing seals. The girl showed no signs of releasing the boy anytime soon. "I'll have to knock her out. She's having a mild combat stress reaction, otherwise known as shell shock. It's probably her first time experiencing something as malevolent as Kyuubi's chakra. Right now, Naruto is the only thing she is familiar with and is acting as her security blanket. Moving him could worsen the condition." Her hands began to glow a mild green, and she placed her palm onto the girl's forehead. Tayuya's grip on the blonde immediately loosened as she fell forward into Tsunade's arms. She picked the girl up and motioned for Jiraiya to do the same with Naruto, causing him to raise an amused eyebrow. "I thought you'd want to carry Naruto yourself," he chuckled, slinging the boy over a shoulder. "Don't tell me you've become attached to the girl already." The woman scowled and motioned one of the Anbu officers over. "Clean this place up. I want absolutely no evidence of what happened here to get out to the public. Do you understand?" The female officer bowed her head in confirmation. Even she understood what would happen if the villagers found out about the genin using Kyuubi's chakra. The chaos would be insurmountable. "Hi, Tsunade-sama. Tsunade nodded and turned towards her former teammate, whom she noticed had adjusted the boy into a much more careful and comfortable position when she wasn't looking. Smirking slightly, she nodded in the direction of Konoha. Let's go, thanks for watching.